Hi guys, and welcome to the show. If you hate managing Windows updates as much as I do, you're going to want to watch this episode. Hey guys, and welcome to the show. It's almost Christmas here, although by the time you get to watch this, I'm sure it'll be just after New Year's. And I'm outside in a t-shirt. And I have with me Matt Camussi, and Matt and I met at JPL, and he taught a Windows 10 workshop and did a great job. And one of the things that he really went into depth about during the workshop was the new Windows update model. And so immediately I asked him if he'd want to be a guest on the show and talk to you guys about it. So without further ado, let me introduce Matt.
Hello. Hi, Lex.
Hey, man, and I understand you have your own podcast, right?
I do, although whether or not I want to professionally mention it, probably safer that I don't. Just know that it's out there somewhere in the darkest reaches of the web.
Woohoo! Well, I just noticed you were prepared with your own custom mic and windshield.
Yep. Yes. I exhale heavily whenever I talk, so just... if this falls over, you'll know why.
Yeah.
It's like a wind
All right.
sail.
So that's awesome, man. So, hey, listen, let's talk a little bit. Let's start out by talking a little bit about why Microsoft decided, to change the update model.
Sure. Yeah. This is definitely something worth talking about to more fully understand why we're changing it. You kind of have to know a little bit more about what the landscape was in terms of servicing Windows prior to kind of like Windows 10 in October timeframe. And the big thing is that, and you have tons of experience within Microsoft, so you could probably relate, but how would you say, like, of all the customers that you have, how many of them or how often would you see a customer that has installed like every service patch that we've published, like security and or even just quality? Would you say that you have many customers that do that?
No, not at all. They like to build their own custom Windows builds.
Right, exactly. And that's the big thing, right? So because so many different customers might have, and this is, this is definitely warranted in certain cases where, customers will have they'll download or have like certain patches installed in the environment for different machines. And then maybe they see that this conflicts with a piece of software that they have or introduces some sort of, issue. That they'll like roll it back or withdraw it or withhold it or something like that. But a lot of times, you'll see that those customers don't exactly go ahead and try to reinstall it in the future after resolving the issue with maybe whatever application that rubbed it the wrong way, etc. There are some customers, many customers, that plain old don't install like stability updates at all. It's all security patches or nothing, right? And so what ends up happening here is that we have this highly fragmented landscape of all of these, not just customers, but even within those customers' environments, individual machines might have this patch, not have that patch, might have this patch installed, maybe not that patch installed. And ultimately, this kind of leads to problems down the line, because back in Microsoft where we're writing this code, when we develop new patches, we're not doing it on the infinite spectrum of different combinations of patches like our customers might have. We're doing it on essentially fully patched systems. We're designing these new security and quality updates based on the assumption or based on a test environment that is basically has no gaps in their patching schemes, right? They're fully patched. And so now what happens is that we might introduce new security patches or something under that same assumption, and it ends up possibly causing issues with customers, and that could be part of the reason why. And many other times we might even have, I think that from a recent statistic or something like that, like an estimated 25% of certain calls related to like bugs or something like that have already been fixed by a patch that a customer just simply did not install. So
right.
So they could have saved themselves a lot of time and money just by trying to keep up with that patching model. So this is the landscape that we're in, and it's obviously a very costly landscape. And although customers feel a little bit more comfortable with having the choice of like granularity within which patches they get to choose to install and which ones they don't install, ultimately it can be just so difficult on both our behalves to try and accommodate that infinite spectrum of unique snowflake configurations out there when trying to stabilize the operating system. So that's kind of where we're coming from with this model.
Yeah. So I think what people really need to realize here is that this is in the long run going to be better for them, right? It's going to save them a lot of money. It's better for our vendors because our vendors don't, they have the same problem we do. They write drivers and software for essentially fully patched, ready to go systems. And so let's say you install some third-party product and it breaks. Well, now you've got to call that vendor. And that vendor just assumes you're running the latest and greatest version of Windows and has to, fight through figuring out what's wrong. And so I like the idea. I know that some of our customers are a little concerned because they like to test our patches in their environments, before they roll them out. And this kind of, all or everything in one update model kind of adds some complexities to that for them moving forward. But in the long run, it's a good thing.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And we even still, within Microsoft, what we do like to do is while we are trying to make it better for everybody, we also do still try to provide at least a little bit of flexibility or a little bit of control, or at least a decent enough sort of heads up in some form or another. And that's represented in the way that we've changed the servicing models for even just Windows 7 and the server side of that, as well as with the whole Windows as a service model for Windows 10. So yeah, we tried to put at least a little bit more control than just saying, do this, and then that's it. You have no other choices, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about what the different service models are.
Sure. So what we can do is start talking about probably one of the more immediate effects for a lot of customers, because a lot of customers are still using Windows 7, for example. The service model for that has changed since October of this year, 2016. And that one, that was unfortunately a bit of a surprise to some customers. They noticed that it changed, but they're not really completely comfortable or not completely aware of how this has changed for them. And the way that it kind of works is, as of October, you would notice that there's going to be, mainly for the operating system, sort of two major updates. There's going to be a security-only update that happens once a month, and then there's going to be a cumulative update that also gets released once a month. And the idea here is that we're kind of trying to bring Windows 7 servicing closer to in line with Windows 8 and Windows 10. So before, of course, we had, on Patch Tuesday, you had anywhere between 5 to 25 different potential patches that you could download. But now we've narrowed it down to 2, of which you might only need to install 1. Once again, this is just for the operating system. The main difference is that with the security update, that is a sort of monthly security update that has a bunch of different security patches rolled up into one for just that month. So you might see an October security update, November security update, December security update. And these aren't cumulative, meaning that if you install December's security update, it does not include the ones for November and October, right? So for that, it's a little bit more granular, because let's say that this security update, the specific one has, causes an issue or something like that, you would withdraw or further test or patch or whatever your application, or upgrade your applications, etc. And then you can go forward and install that security update for that month. In which case, that's where we introduce a little bit of friction with customers who like to be able to uninstall just that KB that caused the conflict. Now instead we're saying, well, you might have to withdraw the December one entirely until it's determined what the cause of the issue might be. And to try and prevent that from being just sort of a surprise on Patch Tuesday, we actually start releasing next month's proposed security updates ahead of time. We call them preview. And so you could see those show up in WSUS or Microsoft Update Catalog, etc. The other one is much more cumulative. And this one's like the big show here, because with Windows 7, every month there's going to be a sort of like cumulative roll-up of all these updates. That includes not just all of the security updates released since like October, but also quality updates as well, right? So if you skip October and November's cumulative update, if you install December's, it contains everything from those past 3 months. So, and that one is a lot more in line with kind of like what we're trying to do as our service, because that is more fully patched, and that brings you more, that increases your chances of proactively resolving any issues before you have to call them in, right? Turns out, we've included that quality update that you would have called in a bug about. So, so that's the main difference with the way that like Windows 7 and Server 2008 R2 are going to be handled. So
yeah, that's awesome. And the funny part about that is that, excuse me, I'll have customers say, well, I like the old way. Oh, well, you've got Macs in your environment, right? How does Apple do it? Oh, well, Apple just pushes out a cumulative update every so often. Mm-hmm. How do you like that? Oh, I love it because I don't have to do anything.
Right. Yep. It's like,
think about what you just said. Yeah.
Yeah, and even so, like we still like have a little bit of control where you can still like test it out ahead of time and temporarily withdraw those security updates. Now, as far as like any critical ones that happen out of band, we'll release those out of band, right? We'll release those whenever they're necessary. But going forward, we'll roll these updates into each other. And with the cumulative ones for Windows 7, we're eventually going to start like rolling in earlier patches as well. So ones previous to this new servicing model. So in the end, you might install like one OS cumulative update that installs like the majority of the patches that were released since SP1's introduction into the general availability realm. So so that is a pretty interesting perspective on that too.
Awesome. Do you have a slide deck or anything for us?
Actually, I'm a big Whiteboard fan, so if you don't mind, I'm going to see if I can do that. Got a little Surface Pen ready for us.
Woo! Technology.
So what I'd like to explain a little bit about is the whole Windows as a Service aspect of Windows 10, because this is basically the brave new world that we're heading into as an enterprise when we're adopting Windows 10. And considering Windows 7 is going to be going away in 2020, I think January 14th, this might be something to consider sooner than later, I would think. But the way that it works is that this whole Windows as a service thing for like consumers, a lot of people are under the impression that this means sort of like Windows as a subscription, which isn't quite the way that it happens. What Windows as a service means is that rather than having like this monolithic model of basically like creating a new operating system every like 3 to 5 years and surprising you with new features and whole new API sets and new security mechanisms and et cetera, what we're going to be doing is going to be sort of continuously providing these new operating systems, new versions, new builds of Windows 10. And we do this for multiple reasons. But first, I kind of want to talk about these things called branches. All right, so I apologize for my handwriting on this, but there are 3 main branches for Windows 10. So when you're digging up documentation, you're going to see this thing all over the place as far as this branch, that branch. And what I kind of want to do is explain the difference between all of these different branches and what's offered in each and what support means for each and how long are they going to be around, etc. And there's 3 main branches. And let's see if I'm going to even get colorful with this thing. There is something known as current branch, also known as CB. There's something known as current branch for business, also known as CBB. And there's something known as long-term servicing branch, or LTSB. And between current branch and current branch for business, right? I'm gonna repeat this later, but keep this in mind. There's barely any difference between current branch and current branch for business, right? And basically, the only difference between the two, or the main difference between the two, is deferral. How long do you want to defer getting a certain build of Windows 10? And then a second slight difference is support lifetimes. But let's dive into this a little bit more, right? So over time, right, here we're going to bring in a little graph here. Okay, so here's time as it progresses. Over time, we're going to release new versions of Windows 10. And if you have Windows 10 at home, there's a very good chance that it is set to be on Current Branch. Current Branch is basically just like when we release Windows 10 to the general public. So there's a lot of that goes into a build before this, but to summarize, right? We are continuously churning out new builds of Windows 10 back in Microsoft, and then over time we'll sort of like release certain snapshots of this build out to like within Microsoft for further testing. Then we'll patch, and then we'll and you know what? I'll even draw it right here, right? So we build constantly new versions of Windows 10 in Microsoft over here internally. Then we sort of dog food it, which is to say that we allow Microsoft people to test it out, right? Then we push it out to, say, Windows Insider Preview, in which case, we have two different rings for it. This is something that anybody can sign up for. It's kind of like, although it's a lot more stable, you can kind of think of it as like alpha and beta builds, but it's a lot more stable than that. You can be on the fast ring, which is less stable, but you get more releases, and you can be on the slow ring, which is more stable, et cetera, right? So
kind of like release candidates?
Kind of, sort of, yeah. So slow ring for Windows Insider Preview is more akin to a release candidate, in my opinion. And fast ring is, a little bit more frequent than that. So after this point, we are still like testing. We're receiving feedback from the community, and there's thousands of people signed up for Windows Insider Preview, right? I know that I have it on my home computer myself, and I'm on the slow release platform, the release candidate kind of version. And so far, it's been a wonderful experience. I'm starting to see like some pretty cool features that are not going to be introduced to the general public just yet. But eventually, once we fix a lot of bugs, make it more stable, and we keep reading feedback, and we decide, okay, I think this is ready. Then it gets released out to Current Branch, right? And this is the general public here. So millions and millions of people around the world who are using Windows 10, who have Windows 10 on their computers, and in some enterprises, a portion of your enterprise machines might be on Current Branch. You receive this either via Windows Update or otherwise, and it doesn't stop there, right? And so we continuously patch, and then a period of time afterwards, we then release it to Current Branch for Business. So to put this in a little bit more concrete terms, think about that Windows 10 build that came out in November, the November update of build 1511, which, by the way, it took me way too long to realize that this whole build number scheme, like 1511, 1607, it took me way too long to realize that meant year and month of the release.
I am laughing right now because I am on the same. I'm in the same boat. It didn't dawn on me. And the deal is that we deal with build numbers all the time. So
right. Yeah.
It was just another build number to me.
Yep, exactly. So I was like, I think like it came to me like in an embarrassing moment. Like I might have been in the middle of teaching class, right? Good thing I knew all about this in the middle of teaching class, right? But I was just like, oh man, but when did 1511 come out? I think it was like the 11th month of 20. Oh, I got it. I figured it out. I'm dumb. But yeah, that's so when in doubt, just remember that is what that whole number means. But speaking of 1511, right? So we started off in Microsoft, right? And we decided, you know what? This looks like it's ready to ship and start being tested, and this might be our next big build of Windows 10. So we designed 1511 back in Microsoft here. And then we just patched it, fixed it, patched it, stabilized it, etc. Pushed out more internally within Microsoft, dog-fooded it. We're not exactly a small company, so we have a large number of people testing this out and providing feedback and using telemetry and so on to figure out like what things are working and what things are not. And then we continue. 1511 then gets pushed out to our Windows Insider Preview, right? But along the way, it gets stabilized, patch. We listen to feedback like crazy for a lot of this stuff. And then this just keeps on trucking along over and over, right? Until eventually it hits Current Branch for Business, to which, by that time, you can bet we're already building the next version of Windows, and that gets pushed along, right? So that's kind of like the stream of how builds work with Windows 10. Now, the one question that we get a lot when we talk about this is support and servicing and stuff like that. Basically, a question is, okay, well, if I decide to go with one version of Windows 10, how long can I stay on it? Can I stay on it forever, right? To which the answer is not quite. Because this is like a whole new way of delivering Windows, we're going to be pushing these new builds of Windows out maybe like anywhere between 1 and 3 times per year, right? More closely to like a twice per year kind of thing. But to visualize how long you have on a build of Windows 10 before you have to upgrade, let's take a look at this graph that I had drawn previously over here. Let me clean things up a little bit so that it's easier to see, right? So let's start off with talking about current branch, right? So current branch gets released out to the world, right?
Yeah.
And at this point, let's say that this is build, let's say 1511. So CB 1511, right? Got released in November, and we pushed it out. Eventually, we released the next build of current branch, which is popularized as the anniversary update, or 1607, came out around July of 2016 for current branch. Okay, so this new build of current branch, which went out to the general public, now what this means is that our stated support is that for current branch, you need to be on to be supported, you need to be on the latest build of current branch, which means that with excluding a little grace period of around 60 days, which I'll talk about in just a bit, by the time generally that 1607 comes out, 1511 is basically out of support, which means that it doesn't get patches and such.
Right. So if you call into support and 1607 is out and you're on 1511, I guess we'll just ask you to upgrade to 1607?
Generally, yeah. And once again, this is the build that's going out to the general public. Now, a lot of people, I'm sure, in their enterprises are kind of freaking out thinking, oh my God, this is insane that we have to constantly be doing this. And I'll get to what your scenarios will be in just a bit when I talk about current branch for business. But generally, this is the way that it's going to be. And there is a little bit of a grace period, as mentioned, of about 60 days to help you go from one build to the next, in which case for about 2 months after we declare that previous build as reaching end of support, for example, 1511 in this case, then it'll still receive the security updates, but eventually you're going to want to upgrade to 1607.
Yeah.
And so the same cycle basically happens with whatever's going to come next. The creators update as of this time, this is right now I'm speaking from December 2017, but we announced that creators update is going to be released sometime, I think generally in the spring of next year. So current branch 17.0, I'm sure a lot of people want me to write a specific number in here, but I'm just going to say X, because we don't really know.
Yeah.
But yeah, so eventually 17.0X, or the creators update, is going to come out, and we're going to expect people to move to that build. And for a lot of consumers out there, the most of what they're going to encounter is if they leave their machines on overnight, they're going to come back to their machine and they're going to notice that Windows 10 has upgraded to the newest version, right?
Yeah.
So,
and we should mention that this isn't just patches and updates. The jump from 1511 to 1607 was actually pretty awesome. There are some new features. It's got new functionality. It's a pretty cool build, and I expect that to go along, as with newer updates as they come out.
Yeah, that's an excellent point to bring up. So something that I want to mention is, I keep mentioning these new builds. And what I mean by that is that these are legitimately new versions of Windows 10. So when you upgrade, it's not like you're installing a couple of really big patches. It's not like a service pack or anything like that, because service packs are kind of like not around anymore for operating systems. What you're doing when you do an upgrade is that you're keeping your settings and your data and your programs and the majority of your drivers, right? but you're basically swapping out the operating system underneath and replacing it with an all-new version of the operating system with new features and such. So I'm glad that you brought up that topic, because we have a very clear distinction between what we call like regular regular quality updates and what we call sort of like feature updates. So feature updates are new builds of Windows 10 that we push out that include altogether new features, right? Whether it's consumer features or enterprise features, right? But quality updates, or basically your regular patches, are going to continuously occur on your Patch Tuesdays for all supported builds of Windows 10 at any given time, right? So basically, during this time, security updates are going to come out on Patch Tuesdays for any builds of Windows 10 that are in support, right? But you bring up a very good point.
Yeah, absolutely. And the reason I bring it up is because I'll launch the Movies app and it's been updated, or I'll launch, the Groove Media app and it's been updated.
Yeah, or Edge, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep. Yeah. So now, of course, enterprise IT administration so are trying to think probably around this time, like, okay, so now what does this mean for me? Because I'm thinking back to the days of going from like XP to Vista or XP to 7 or so on. It takes months and months of planning and testing and compatibility fixing and stuff like that to move from one operating system to another. And that was just happening once every 3 to 5 years, right? So now you're telling me that we're going to be doing this every maybe twice a year? That's pretty crazy. So let me lessen the impact of this a little bit, because I mentioned so far about the support cycle for current branch. Let's talk about current branch for business. Now, as I mentioned before, there's very little difference between current branch and current branch for business. For the same build of Windows 10, current branch and current branch for business have the same general features, right? So the features that are in 15.11 also exist in current branch, also exist for current branch for business, right? But the big thing is a delay, because so like in the customers that you've worked with, Alex, right? How often is it that like a new security patch comes down and your customer immediately deploys it? Let's say it's like a non-critical, right? Or like a quality update. How often is it that they immediately push it to every device in the environment?
Yeah, that doesn't happen very often. It will eventually get pushed,
right?
But it's not going to be an immediate push.
Exactly, right? There's a period of time, in which case, obviously, we want to test this thing to see how it interacts with our critical applications and how it behaves generally in our environment. And that is basically what current branch for business is. That's all that it is. So what it means is that, let's say over here we got current branch 15.11 being released, right? 4 months after it gets released for current branch, we release it again, but for current branch for business. We announce that it is now available for current branch for business. So here is where it gets pushed, right? So CBB of 15.11. Okay. So it always has to be a minimum of 4 months. According to our current, public statements, we're not going to release a current branch for business version of that operating system, of that build of Windows 10, earlier than 4 months, right? So all we're doing here is we're deferring.
So hold on. Are you saying 4 months after the current branch?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So let's say 15.11 got released. Then a minimum of 4 months after 15.11 got released back in November, we released it for current branch for business.
Yeah, no, I get it. I just wanted to make sure that everybody else was clear on it.
Oh, sure. Because, that terminology gets a little confusing. But basically, it's all we're doing is we're putting in a delay, a deferral. Because during this time, right, at this minimum 4 month delay, we're going to continue getting feedback, right? So remember that whole cycle that I was showing you before about like how we push a build from inside of Microsoft all the way to the general public and so on? Every single step of the way, we're getting feedback in locations that provide telemetry. We get that telemetry. We basically push out these stability fixes, security fixes, and we roll them all up, and then we put them into current branch for business when Microsoft, and perhaps when we concur with some of our key vendors and partners and stuff like that, we give that build the seal of approval, and we say, you know what? This is good. This is good for enterprises now. So let's now say that this is current branch for business eligible. and that gets pushed out. And a little difference between support longevity between current branch and current branch for business is, so going back to this, right? So let's say 1607 got released, right? 4 months after that, we then release it. We then announce it to be current branch for business available, right? And then eventually over here, this 170X gets pushed out to current branch for business, right? So as opposed to current branch, where really only the most recent build of Windows 10 is in support, plus a 60-day grace period, in current branch for business, the most recent 2 builds are in support. All right. So that gives you a little bit more time, plus the grace period. Although you don't want to have to wait until the grace period to do this kind of stuff, but you have a lot more time with current branch for business in your environment than you would for regular current branch. So
do customers still have the option to push these out, the CBB builds, via WSUS? So in other words, are we saying that 1511 shows up in WSUS 4 months after the current branch 1511 shows up?
There's tons of ways to control this, and that's like one of the biggest appeals of this. So depending on the size of your environment, we provide a whole bunch of different options. So WSUS is absolutely one of them, and you can control not just when to push this out for any machines that are on current branch for business, but you can also even put additional delays in that, right? So instead of saying like, okay, current branch for business is released, I'm going to push it out via, say, WSUS. Maybe I don't want everybody to be right on this current branch for business release all at once. I can even stagger it a little bit so that this build of, say, 1607 current branch for business, which as of right now, it was pretty recently announced to be eligible for CBB. Maybe I just want to come up with these custom, as we call them, rings, so that maybe my pilot groups will be like ring 0 and get 1607 first, and then maybe I set up another ring, in which case another larger department will get it like 2 weeks after that, and then another department will get it 2 weeks after them. So you can have a lot of control using like WSUS, SECM, etc., to be able to stagger the way that these builds get rolled out. And to make it even simpler, what you're doing when you control whether or not a machine is on current branch or current branch for business is, once again, you're just specifying how often to defer these feature updates. And then one last thing that you can do, like if you want to manually, say, put your machine on current branch for business, all you're really doing, let me see if I can do this through my own settings app here. All you're really doing when you go into settings is you're going into your update security, and in Windows Update there are some advanced options, and there's this little checkbox over here that says defer feature updates. That defer feature updates checkbox switches you to current branch for business. So if you want to do it manually, that's the easiest way to do it.
So even home users can switch to deferred feature updates.
That is correct, yeah.
Wow.
So I mean, depending on the SKU of Windows 10, yeah, but basically that is it. So, and then there's this concept that we introduced with 1511 called Windows Update for Business, which allows you to basically control this kind of stuff through group policy. And increasingly, through new versions of Windows 10, we allow you to get more and more control over how Windows Update for Business works. So you can do stuff like not only move large groups of machines over into current branch for business, but you can even like select like what gets pushed through Windows Update, stuff like drivers, specific drivers and stuff like that. That we introduced in Anniversary Update. So there's a lot to it. There's as mentioned, like we wanted to be able to find a way to be able to keep up with the flexibility of pushing out new versions of Windows 10 and so on, but still provide a little bit of flexibility for IT administrators so that they can have a little bit more control over, what gets pushed when. So there, we're trying not to make it so absolute like that.
One more question that I have for you.
Sure.
So when we release current branch for business, so we'll use 1511 as an example here.
Sure.
The CBB build for 1511 is going to include all of the updates that we've already learned about and applied to CB 1511, correct?
That is right.
Yeah. Just wanted to make sure that was clear.
Yeah. So because that is part of the reason why we have effectively decide that CBB 1511 is eligible for CBB, is that it has enough patches and security patches and stuff like that to be deemed as stable for the environment.
And it's been out in the wild and it's stable and
yeah. A more, I guess, cynical way of looking at it is that we're using the world as a guinea pig for your enterprise. Right? I mean, that's basically it.
It's cynical but true.
Right. Yeah. So instead of having that one pilot group or that one testing lab environment in your enterprise to test that one patch in, now you have millions and millions of users.
Okay. So what about LTSB?
Good question. LTSB is a different beast altogether. Long-term servicing branch operates on a very similar model to our old monolithic release an operating system every 3 to 5 years kind of model. LTSB is long-term servicing branch, and it basically has the support model of 5 years mainstream support, 5 years extended support, that traditional way, like the traditional way that we handle with operating system servicing. But here's the catch. LTSB is the version, it's a different SKU of Windows. So if you have Enterprise, if you download, you'll go to your licensing server or whatever, you'll see that LTSB is a different build of Windows 10. And or a different like SKU of Windows 10 basically, in that it effectively is the operating system version that we intend for like ATMs, hospital equipment, air traffic control. It is an extremely watered down, feature removed version of the operating system. A lot of built-in apps, stuff like Cortana and so on, are all missing. Edge is not there. And it is, as it sounds, very watered down. Now, in case you or your enterprise are considering using LTSB as your main thing because the whole idea of not having to upgrade twice a year or so on is unappealing to you, I offer a very strong word of caution. This is something that Microsoft does not recommend for like the majority of your environment. Because there's a couple of things that you have to consider. One is you'll probably end up getting feature envy, right? We're not releasing long-term servicing branch as frequently as we are releasing it for other builds, for other branches, right? So that means that, let's say you have the 2015 version of Windows 10 LTSB. It's stuck with the features that it has until another LTSB comes out in the future that might have the features that you want. So, so that's huge. That's a huge thing, and so that feature envy, although it sounds silly, is very real, because in enterprise environments, if there's something that comes out for 15.11, 16.07, anniversary update came out with the ability to have the UEV agent baked in, so now that's a whole software deployment step that I get to skip, right? Well, you might not have that in LTSB, or some equivalent going down the line. Who knows what's going to show up in Creativity Update that you won't get for 5 years because you decided to stick with LTSB. So, additionally, a lot of those modern apps that are built into Windows 10 that your users could use for productivity reasons are stripped out. So there's a lot of arguing against using LTSB. So Microsoft's official stance is try to avoid using LTSB for your normal user scenarios, and try to restrict it more for certain things, like, as mentioned, like mission critical machines that you don't care about having specific features on, that just need to have an OS that does one simple thing to be a platform for a critical application to work. etc. But in general,
like
that
service
is a
on
whole
the
different
International Space Station.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Which, I can't wait to teach a workshop up there. I'm sure they'll invite me.
Hey, if you go, I go.
All right. It's a deal. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Well, listen, man, this has been awesome and, again, very informative. So I certainly appreciate you being on the show, and I'd love to have you back.
Oh, yeah, it would be a pleasure. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. Well, guys, that's it for this week's show. Hopefully you learned as much as I did. This was really interesting, and I certainly enjoyed it. So, Matt, thanks again. And without further ado, this is your Taste of Premiere.